Hey everyone, thank you so much for logging into the show Beyond the Checkbox, Mind Masters. I'm stepping in as your guest host for Dr. Ryan Todd. My name is Jason Gotwalt, mental health and well-being consultant, health tech expert, and insatiably curious about human behavior and how to level up performance. And with that, I had the honor of interviewing our guest, Melody Wilding. Melody is highly engaging, and for me, I had the takeaways of the importance of conversations, but not just how to have effective conversations, the 10 specific conversations that we need to have. And Melody shares some of her wonderful content from her book, Managing Up, How to Get the Things You Need from the People in Charge. We also dove into human behavior, and we learned about the question behavior effect, how to apply it right away and make it useful for you. I think you're going to get a lot from this conversation today. She's passionate. She is absolutely a subject matter expert inside and out. And most importantly, she's given us tangible takeaways that we can all take advantage of. Enjoy the show. So one thing I think was really interesting, we connected a little bit before on LinkedIn, and you brought up a data point that I have thought was really interesting in the industry. So being in the workplace well-being industry, talking with HR folks for many, many years, well over a decade now, a lot of the research is pretty typical. You kind of, okay, employee engagement's down again this year, or it's slightly up. But you talked about the importance of a leader or a boss on mental health and psych safety, even more so than a couple critical people in your lives that you would think would have a bigger impact on the mental health. So tell me a little bit about that research.
Yeah, this was one of two data points that really drove me to write the book. And what you're referring to is there was a recent study that found that your relationship with your manager has a bigger effect on your mental health than the relationship you have with your doctor, your therapist, and almost as much as the relationship you have with your spouse, which that part is pretty remarkable. And when you actually step back to think about it, it makes a lot of sense because we spend the vast majority of our time at work. And at work, we spend the vast majority of our time with our direct leader. And so it really benefits us to be intentional, to be thoughtful about that relationship. Yet, so many of us just feel jerked around by the whims, the dynamics, the relationships that are happening around us. We don't realize how much control or influence we do have to shape how other people see us, how they treat us, to shape the trajectory of that relationship.
Beautifully put. Okay. We are absolutely on the same page here. So tell me a little bit, that was an inspiring piece of research that led to Managing Up, your most recent book. Tell us a little bit about the work you were doing before that and why that research hit home so much to move you to the point of like, I need to write my next book.
Yes. Well, as you mentioned, my background, I teach human behavior at the graduate level. And before that, though, I started my career as a therapist. So I'm a licensed social worker. And when I entered this field, it was way before there were folks like Headversity doing the great work you are. This sort of space of workplace mental health, no one was really talking about it. It was very like this side tertiary thing that you really only talked about if something very serious was going on. Yet, what I saw again and again as I started doing therapy was that the people who were coming to me were very driven, were very high achieving. And again, these are people that spend 70, 80% of their time at work, but they didn't have a lot of direction in terms of how do I manage the mental and emotional struggles that come along with work. Imposter syndrome, the pressure I feel like I'm under. How do I not take feedback so personally? How do I give feedback to other people without feeling like I'm ruining the relationship and still build trust and have that psychological safety? How do I communicate and be assertive with people that have more positional power than me? How do I stay resilient when priorities are changing every day and we're facing setbacks and reorgs and what have you? And all of that comes down to emotion regulation, managing your mind, yet no one was talking about it back then. And so that's really where I carved out a niche for myself. And my first book, Trust Yourself, came out in 2021. So, height of the pandemic. And that book was really about how do you manage your own inner psychology at the workplace? As I mentioned, imposter syndrome, overthinking, self doubt, people pleasing, all of those internal hurdles that cap us in the workplace. That's what Trust Yourself is about. And as I was promoting that book and as it was getting into the hands of readers, I would hear from people again and again that this is great. I feel more confident in myself and more secure in the value that I do bring to the table. But all of this breaks down when I have to deal with someone who has a higher authority than me, or when I have to hold my own with someone that has a more dominant personality. And so what I noticed is that again and again, what a lot of people were attributing to, oh, I just have trouble with overthinking. That's why I'm reading into the email so much. Or I'm not good at boundaries. That's why I'm just a people pleaser, which is why I have trouble pushing back and saying no at work. And every question I was getting ultimately came back to this idea of managing up, which is a very learnable skill set. And in my opinion, the most powerful skill set you need to feel more in control, more confident of what's going on for you at work.
Okay. Very, very interesting. So your work is seeing, it sounds like a lot of the people coming to you were almost pointing the finger at themselves. Like, I can do a lot of good, but if I were better in these areas, I could probably manage better. I can deal with the challenges of working with my leader or whomever it might be. Very interesting. Often we're talking about, and a strong conversation in the HR community and leadership community is how do we train leaders to support mental well-being, which of course is really important to have that awareness. It sounds like, though, a lot of the work that you've done from skill development, working with high performers, is also giving them the tools that is a dual responsibility for them to protect their own mental well-being. How important is conversational skills building and conversational frameworks
Oh,
for folks today?
it's everything. It is everything because I'm sure you have a lot of conversations about AI on this podcast and also internally. I'm sure you're talking about it quite a bit. And the thing that AI will not quickly replace is that conversational skill, is the interpersonal part, is the nuance of being able to respond in the moment when you get pushback or an objection or someone is upset or unhappy or you get resistance. And almost everything at work is communication. Whether it is in a conversation, it's a meeting, it's a message that you're sending, an email that you're writing, and each time we're communicating, it is a chance to teach people how to treat us. That is one of my favorite phrases. And it really comes back to that idea that if we treat ourselves with respect, that if we honor our own boundaries, if we talk about our own ideas with conviction, if we give feedback about things we feel are important, then that sends signals to other people that our ideas are valuable, our time is worth being respected. And so that's why I actually chose to craft the book around 10 conversations for managing up because often this skill set of managing up, it's we're taught it in a very piecemeal fashion where we may be told be proactive or make your boss look good, and we get these little one-liners that sound good in theory, but when the rubber hits the road and we actually have to roll this skill set out over time, we're kind of at a loss for what it means. And what I have found is that it touches so many different interactions that we have. It touches so many points of the life cycle of our relationship with our leaders, also beyond our direct manager. Because right now we're all working in environments where we may literally have multiple bosses, but you may also have relationships with other people in power. You may have to deal with a important client or a vendor that has a lot of influence, and that may also be someone you have to manage up to. So the 10 conversations framework gives us a way to acquire this skill, to roll it out in a way that's more methodical and systematic rather than scattershot.
I love that. So I love a couple perspectives I'm really taking from this, um, in which we all feel and experience, but maybe more so than before, especially in a hybrid type workforce that experience, or even customer relationships, right? If you're in that customer facing role, we're not going on site and shaking their hand and sitting down in their office. Very rarely does that happen. Is that there, if we think about managing up, it is not just about to your direct leader. It could be other people of influence or collaboration or customers. Or I'd imagine this would be extremely valuable in personal relationships too. Um, so that's a really important perspective, I think, when people start to think about how can I use these conversational frameworks to my advantage, to get what I need from people in charge. The other really interesting thing there is what you said earlier is how do we think, what is a conversation?
Mhm.
And so typically, of course, I'm thinking we're having a conversation because there's a verbal exchange. But in today's workforce and workplace, especially, that could be a quick Slack. That could be an email.
Mhm.
And often, I don't know what maybe we can look up the stat. I don't know, Stephen, but I don't know what the percentages of how does communication, how much of it is digital and how much of it is digital virtual. Digital virtual, is that a term? Let's just say that's a term. And then how much is in-person 3D conversations? But would you say are there standard frameworks that can work for any conversation across any medium?
Yeah, to your point about when I use the word conversation, yes, we're not just talking about the formal moments, like your one-on-one, your performance review. There's also so many overlooked opportunities. You mentioned like the quick Slack exchange, or I'm sure many people have had the experience of you hop onto a Teams or a Zoom meeting. It's you and one other person, an executive, let's say, and you're making small talk. That's a conversation. And also, conversations aren't a one and done, right? They happen over time. And that's how we build a relationship, trust, rapport with someone. And so, yeah, going back to your point, I think there is a stat in the book that I cite. It's probably even higher than this now, but it's over 70% of our communication every day is done digitally. And so,
Really?
yeah, as I was constructing the 10 conversations for this book, I had top of mind that these these specific topic areas. These are things that are happening regardless if you are co located with your leader, if you are totally remote, if you are hybrid and in person. Some of the times, it doesn't matter. You still need to be having these 10 conversations. Ideally, you're having them in reasonably the order that's laid out in the book because it's intentionally done that way. But
Okay.
real life is a bit messier, so you may hop in and out of some of them. Some of them interconnect together, which we can talk about, but they really are meant to be multi-use and really a structure that adapts for any different setting that you're in.
Amazing. And you're absolutely right. Our team has popped up the stat, or at least the most recent, via the World Wide Web here. It looks like about 75% of conversations are digital online tools or email,
Mhm.
and even 7% of conversations are happening through online project management tools, maybe like a Monday or something like that. I know we use Monday internally. And only about 18% are voice type conversations.
Mhm.
So, to your point, how important it is to really understand these frameworks and put them in place. How often do you think people are practicing having good conversations? What percentage of the workforce right now is working on that skill of effective communication?
If I had to put a finger on it, I think it's much less than should be because as I said before, this is going to be more and more of a differentiator as AI starts replacing things and people's communication gets more and more generic because they're just putting it into AI and taking that response and
Oh, that's interesting too.
copying and pasting it. And so your ability to bring nuance, to ask good questions, to engage very thoughtfully, that is going to be your differentiator. So if you are someone who feels like more of the sensitive type who's very perceptive of other people's emotions and subtleties, changes in the tenor of a meeting or people's body language, that is only going to benefit you moving forward. And what I find is most of my clients hit a cap in their career, usually mid career, because their technical skills got them so far, made them successful. But there becomes this tipping point where it starts to become your ability to build relationships, to navigate the politics around you, to build trust and rapport and credibility, and frankly, your executive presence, that becomes really the currency of what gets you ahead. And that comes down to that situational awareness, being able to adapt to different people in the moment and adapt your communication, but also knowing which of these conversations to have and when, that that becomes the real skill that separates you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to use that with my kids. There's got to be a point where I can say a lot less than should be.
Yes.
That was fantastic. Okay, and for our wonderful audience today, and you said there's a meaningful or purposeful order
Yeah.
in which these 10 conversations should happen ideally. Let's talk about that first conversation, and if you can give our audience a little bit of a tidbit, maybe a coaching point on how to practice that, developing that skill, that conversation framework. What's number one?
Of course. So we just to zoom out. So we have those 10 conversations. The first 5 are the most foundational. Alignment, which we'll get into in a minute. Then we have styles, ownership, feedback, and boundaries. And then those foundational ones pave the way for more advanced ones, which are things like visibility, networking, advancement, money. And then last is quitting. Because even when you have one foot out the door, whether you're leaving a project team, whether you are changing an entire organization, you still have to manage your reputation and your relationships. But everything starts with that alignment conversation because if we're not moving in the same direction, then it's very easy for you as the employee to feel sidelined. For if you are a leader and you're someone in the middle who is people managing up to you, but also you are managing up to the layers above you, then you can waste time. It can feel very frustrating because you're trying to advocate for certain things and it's not going through. And so alignment is so critical to also make sure you are not spinning your wheels. You are working on the highest value promotable work that actually creates a triple win. It creates a benefit for your team, for you, and the organization as a whole. So when it comes down to alignment, we start there because yes, it is foundational for everything else, but it also tends to be one of the easier conversations to have at first because so much of it is about asking good questions, right? It's about listening, observing to where attention is going around you, but also asking really good questions of your leadership. And if you ask a very high level question, you get a very high level answer. And so this is why just asking, well, what are our priorities this quarter, sometimes doesn't give us the level of insight that we want or that we need. And so in the book, there's probably over a dozen different questions you can ask. But one of my favorites is what are the metrics that you are asked about the most? Or what are the metrics that you discuss the most with your manager? Because yeah, that gives you almost instant insight into what's actually important, even if it hasn't been stated otherwise. And what is your manager going to be evaluated on? Because that's going to be a very helpful data point to understand areas they may be sensitive about. They may be more likely to micromanage, dare I say, around. So you want to understand that so you know where to put your energy.
Thank you for that. And I love that because it also, in that question, says, we're on the same team here. How can I support you? How can I help you be successful and us be successful together in that one question? Okay. And so much more good stuff in there. So let's take the leader perspective. So if you're to speak to the leaders out there today and you were to say, you probably have a team of high performers, or at least one high performer, or so much potential in that team. What What would you say to those leaders? What are the signs? What are the cues? What are the things that they should be aware of or careful of to really foster high performance amongst their team and or support mental well-being or psychological safety to create the environment
Mhm.
that can allow someone to thrive?
I love this because everything does start from the top, right? And that sets the tone for everything else. So we've been talking a lot today about managing up. You need to explicitly give people permission to manage up to you because we all come from different professional backgrounds where we may have come from different workplace cultures. We also all come from different ethnic or racial cultures that all have different relationships to how they relate to authority. And so give people permission to manage up to you. And by that, I mean things as simple as when I share an idea, I expect all of you to ask me really good questions, to try to poke holes in my thinking if that's what you actually want. But give people permission to do that. And actually, so the first conversation is about alignment. The second conversation is about styles. And this is something I'm always talking about with my leaders because the best thing you can do for your people and to create psychological safety is to reduce ambiguity as much as possible. There is inherently going to be so much ambiguity in our work, right? Markets are always shifting, goals, all of that. But if you can give people more concreteness and be more explicit about what to expect from you and how to work with you as a leader, it really mentally is very soothing for people. Because in research that I've read, when people struggle with toxic management the most, it's inconsistency that people point to the most. And so when it comes to styles, there's an exercise in the book that I call the Me Manual, which is basically creating a operations guide for you as a professional. And you can do this as the employee managing up to somebody else, but it's even better and even easier if you are the leader and you create a simple me manual, a guide for you as a leader for how your team can work with you best. How do you like to give and receive feedback? When are you available? If someone needs a quick check in, should they text you? Should they message you? Are there certain things you want to see in emails when people send that or when they present you problems? Do you want bottom line up front? Do you want the context? All of those little things help you get what you need more efficiently, but also create certainty for the people around you. It reduces that, well, I don't know if so and so is going to like this or they're going to get upset about that approach. And that's what creates psychological safety.
I love that. I love the me manual. Thank you for that. Yeah, we need to row in the same direction. We need to understand what that direction is. Where are we going? How do we measure success? How do we measure those milestones? And then understand that we're a team of individuals who like different communication styles, have different ways of working. And so I think just all in that is allowing people to really build those skills around communication, around empathy, or have the ability to be more empathetic if I can understand better. So some building blocks for really strong team dynamics and team performance, let alone individual performance. That's fantastic. You mentioned, the research that you've continued to look at. You're a professor of human behavior at Hunter College, there in New York. And there's been a lot of publication, excitingly, over the last 10, 15 years in around human behavior and habits. I think like Charles Duhigg, Habit Loop,
Mhm.
and James Clear, 1% Better, and one of my personal favorites, BJ Fogg. I'm not sure if you're aware of
Yep.
him in the BMAP. And they kind of fit together, and they're different perspectives on things and interesting research.
Mhm.
I'm curious from yourself, who's probably you've definitely looked at more research on this than myself. What's the most interesting thing recently, or just surprising thing in general that you've learned around human behavior that maybe wasn't as intuitive as some of the other stuff seems to be?
Mm. I'll give you, there's a few things coming to mind, so I'll try to fit a
Ooh,
few of
okay.
them in. Yeah. Um,
Strap in. I'm ready.
yes, one of them that came up in the book. I like things that are immediately useful and very easy to
Okay.
remember. So one of the things is called the question behavior effect, and this
Okay.
basically means that if you ask a person a question, they automatically feel more in control in the situation. And so, how this works in managing up is instead of saying, we should do this, or I think we should move forward with this plan, which, yes, you should have a point of view, but you can help the other person feel more in control and help it feel more collaborative if you said, what if we explored this direction? And just phrasing it as a question, or even, I wonder what would happen if we did this. That can help the other person feel more in control, less sidelined. It's less, top down and more participatory where the other person feels included. So that's the first one. I'll pause there for a second.
Okay, that's fantastic. So that's really going to help in a lot of different ways, right? Um, it allows one to express their point of view in a way that is from a place of expertise or authority or with a level of confidence, but allowing the other person to engage in that discussion, in that idea. And so that's giving, I guess, yeah, tell me a little bit about that. Is that's going to help, of course, the leader. What general response would one get if they phrase it as a question, a hypothetical? What if we were to try this versus if they were to phrase it as a statement, a recommendation, we should do that? What's the typical response difference that folks would get?
Well, of course, there's a time and a place for everything, right? Sometimes you
Yeah.
do want to be more directive and you want to say, based on the research I've looked at, this is my recommendation. But there may be other times, especially if you're dealing with someone who you can sense is a bit resistant to your idea or maybe defensive around it. That's where asking the question can help lower some of those defenses. You're much more likely to hear what's really behind what the person's resistance is. What if we tried this? Well, I'm not sure that would work because this stakeholder is not on board or we don't necessarily have the budget for that. You're more likely to have a level-headed conversation about some of the concerns that person may have than if you just said, I think we should do it this way. And then when you do that, sometimes you can build back into a corner because you're just defending your viewpoints rather than having, to the point of our conversation today, rather than having a dialogue and a conversation, it becomes more exploratory that way.
Fantastic. Okay. That's called the question something effect. What was it? The
Question, behavior, effect.
question behavior effect. Okay. You
Yes.
said you had a couple more. You like things that are immediately useful
I
that you've
do.
learned.
I do. This one may not be as, I think this is a mindset shift more than anything
Okay.
else. And this is it actually comes down a bit to exposure and distress tolerance. What I find, I work with a lot of people that are more emotionally sensitive, as I mentioned before. And what I find is that for them, it's really easy to avoid feedback because it's uncomfortable. It feels emotionally vulnerable, whether it's giving it to someone else on their team, for example, or it's asking for feedback and having to be on the receiving end of that. And so rather than making it this sort of one-off thing that only happens every so often when you work up the courage to give it or to ask for it, making feedback just more part of your everyday process in terms of how you work with other people. Because when you do that, you're getting more exposure to it. So you fear it less over time because it just becomes a normal part of how you work. It becomes less of an event that you have to brace yourself for and mentally prepare yourself for. It becomes less threatening to you. And you are literally rewiring your amygdala to fear it less. And what this can look like very simply is a lot of times what I'll have people do is incorporate this into their one-on-one process. Usually you're having a one-on-one every week, every other week, at least once a month, I would hope. And in that conversation, that's where you can be asking your manager, what's going well right now and what can be even better. And I love that sort of solution focused, forward looking framework for that. But just making it part of your process instead of this this piecemeal thing that you only do every so often, that can make a huge difference in helping you take feedback less personally or give it more consistently to your team. And for everyone, it just reduces a lot of the stress involved.
Okay, I love that. Yeah, so build in that feedback loop into your daily, weekly, at least monthly
Yeah.
routine. Um, some people, to your point, they're fearful of the feedback, or I'd imagine you worked with folks who are building up the courage to ask for feedback is very difficult to them. What are some practices people might do just to get to the point where they start to incorporate feedback regularly? So just to jump over the other side of the fence and get going with this, what advice do you have for folks like that
Yeah.
are struggling to build the courage?
Yeah, a couple of things. This is, again, it's something you can build into your one-on-ones, for example. You can also use a commitment device, which in habit formation language is basically an idea that creates accountability for you to follow up on something. So in this case, your commitment device might be, hey, next week I'm going to have this presentation ready. I would love to schedule 15 minutes on the calendar now so I can run this past you and get your feedback. And then all of a sudden, it becomes something you are going to do because you have created that accountability for yourself. So you can let people know in advance, and that holds you accountable to actually following through on it. So that's another thing you can do. Um and also getting more comfortable showing your work earlier. I think so many of us, especially if you're very driven, you're a high achiever, you squirrel away, you want to make something perfect before it's ready for prime time, and then you imagine this big reveal. And sometimes that can backfire because you may work on something and things have changed in the meantime, or the client has given other input that may shape your direction, whatever it is. And so if you're showing your work earlier, again, you're getting in more reps, so you're getting more comfortable asking for that feedback, but you're also getting better upfront direction, so the final product can be even more accurate. And so, shipping earlier and showing earlier, that can also be very beneficial.
Fantastic. Okay, I love that. Now, one more question on that: the showing your work through the process, opposed to trying to get it polished and perfect, and then potentially setting yourself up for having to rework a lot when that didn't need to happen necessarily. Um, is there a specific conversation within or framework within managing up that would help in that process? So let me give you an example. Sometimes what might happen is maybe you share your work, but don't give enough direction on the type of feedback
Mhm.
that you're looking for, and it can go off the rails because it's half finished, of course, and the person to give the feedback isn't really aware of what you're looking for. So any tips around if someone to employ that process? Okay, I can try, but how do I direct that my manager or whomever to give me what I need at that point, that stage in the journey of building that presentation or that project out?
I love that you asked this because most people miss this and then get frustrated with the feedback or scared off by it and then never ask for it again. So,
Hmm.
this is so important. And I do talk about this in both the alignment conversation, the first chapter, and ownership, which is the third chapter. And ownership is really about how do you get buy in for your ideas or direction that you want to take. And when it comes to asking for feedback, absolutely, you want to put guardrails on it so you get the input that you need. Classic example, I work with a lot of people that are in creative fields, like let's say graphic design, and they may present something and the person on the other end says, "Well, I don't like this color scheme or this font choice." And that person is frustrated because they think, "Well, at this point, just is the general vibe, is the vibe on point? That's what we're looking for now." And if we're not explicit about that, that's when some of that butting of heads and miscommunication happens. So you teeing it up to say, at this point, these decisions have already been made. And what I could really specifically use your feedback on is this component of this. Or the opposite. For example, you may say, this is a very rough sketch. I've given you kind of the key pillars to respond to, but I want to step back, have a broader conversation about what considerations should we have? What strategic objectives should we be incorporating as we're putting more specifics together around this?
Okay, fantastic. I think this all speaks to how important. So, a psychologically safe work environment, one where people can take risks without the fear of retaliation, is really a dual responsibility. Because one in this example might be trying to help. Okay, I'll give feedback. I'd be happy to give feedback. I just don't love the color and the font so much, but the overall, and that person didn't ask for the specific feedback, so someone unintentionally is creating this fear of retaliation for someone taking a risk exposing their work early for feedback so they can do a better job. So what this has shown to me is that there's so many examples where psychological safety might fall, but not because people are purposely trying to do that. They might be trying to help each other, to collaborate, but it's not coming across properly because it really is a dual responsibility. What are some of the impacts on the workplace, some really important metrics for HR leaders or business owners, and why they really should think about, hey, teaching our workforce on these critical skills around managing up, around leaders to really understand how to support high performance and psych safety and where mental well-being falls in. For companies to really focus on this is not a nice to have, right? To your point earlier, this isn't about tertiary care for mental well-being. This is about a high-performing culture. What are some of the impacts that you've seen with your customers or the research that you've seen? What's the opportunity
Mm.
for businesses and organizations out there?
Yeah. What's been really interesting is that since the pandemic, the number one thing that I am brought into organizations to speak about is some form of setting boundaries, assertive communication. And it's because leadership discovers our people don't know how to speak truth to power. They are saying yes too much, they are agreeing to do things, and then projects are falling through the cracks. We're behind on deadlines. And then leadership is realizing, oh, we're finding out about issues too late, or people said, yes, yes, we can do that. We're on board. When in actuality, there wasn't buy-in, and that trickles down, and there's attrition or retention issues or whatever it is. And so I also find this as well, where organizations are saying, we don't feel like we have a strong talent pipeline. We don't feel like we have people that can operate at more of the executive leadership level, who know how to influence, who know how to have tough conversations and really ruthlessly prioritize. And so they are having to look externally instead of being able to promote from within, which we both know can be costly, can be more time consuming, for example. And so those are two that sort of the problem of your people not speaking truth to power and not having a strong talent pipeline beyond, of course, the performance metrics and engagement and the typical things we think about. But those are two that I think catch people by surprise the most.
Fantastic. So the ability, the capacity, and skill set and frameworks to be assertive, to speak truth to power, set boundaries that can create sustainable relationships and performance in the workplace,
Mhm.
and respectful boundaries, of course, too, and how that ties to performance and or a talent pipeline. And to your point, yeah, one of the biggest, of course, costs for employers is external recruiting, by far, let alone having to replace people because the environment is not conducive of people wanting to continue their career there,
Mhm.
and they might move on elsewhere. Fantastic. What's next for you, Melody? What's the horizon? Where are you going toward?
Well, I've been working with Headversity on some exciting things you all are doing, which has been
Yes.
wonderful. And for right now, I'm spreading the word about this book, and I'm creating a new program all around this book that's called Speak Like a Senior Leader to help fill some of that gap between, I call it the gravitas gap, where you may have people that are very talented, very competent, but that's not coming across in their communication and their presentation. And so really helping those two things jive together.
Fantastic. Well, we're excited for our work together, absolutely. And I'd encourage everyone to pick up a copy of the book and take a read because, yeah, the way you've laid out those 10 conversations is fantastic. And I think what I love about your approach is let's make it useful today. What can you use today? What can you apply immediately that doesn't require years or months or years of training just to get started? So congratulations. It's book number 4. It's fantastic. And you're doing a lot of great work. And thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.